Alien school cadet spit on her boots. 10 seconds later, silence. The morning sun of Prime rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and burning orange. The light fell upon the massive stone walls of the Galactic Coalition Academy, casting long shadows across the training grounds, where thousands of alien cadets prepared for another day of instruction. Lieutenant Commander Holt stood alone in her small dormitory room, staring at her reflection in the polished metal mirror mounted on the wall. She was 31 years old, with short brown hair cut in military regulation style and gray eyes that had seen more combat than most officers twice her age. A thin scar ran along her jawline, a souvenir from the border conflicts that had earned humanity its grudging respect among the spacefaring races. She picked up her boots from beside her bed and began the careful process of polishing them. This was her morning ritual, a small act of discipline that helped center her mind before facing another day at the academy. The black leather gleamed under her careful attention, reflecting the dim light of her quarters like dark mirrors. 6 months. She had been on this alien world for 6 months now, and every single day had been a test of her patience and resolve. Remembered the day she received her orders. She had been stationed aboard the Earth vessel Relentless, serving as executive officer under Captain Drake, when the communication arrived from Fleet Command. She was to report immediately to Earth Station Alpha for reassignment. The briefing room had been cold, filled with admirals and politicians who spoke in careful, measured tones. They explained that the Galactic Coalition had finally agreed to accept human cadets into their prestigious military academies. It was a breakthrough that diplomats had been working toward for decades. Humanity would send its best, and to learn from the alien races, to prove that Earth deserved its place among the stars. Was selected as the first human to attend the command track program at the Coalition Academy on Prime. It was the highest honor any human officer had ever received. It was also, as she quickly learned, a poisoned gift. She finished polishing her boots and set them carefully on the floor. Her dress uniform hung on the wall, pressed and perfect, the silver insignia of the Earth Defense Force gleaming against the dark fabric. She dressed slowly, making sure every button was fastened, every crease was sharp, every detail was flawless. In a place where she was constantly judged, she refused to give anyone ammunition against her. The corridors of the dormitory building were already busy when stepped outside her room. Cadets from a dozen different species moved past her, speaking in languages she had spent months learning to understand. They walked with their characteristic shuffling gait, their reptilian bodies adapted to the heavy gravity of there. The owls strode with arrogant confidence, their iridescent scales catching the light as they moved. They clicked and chittered to one another, their faces impossible for to read. None of them acknowledged her presence. She had grown used to being invisible. In the early days, she had tried to introduce herself, to make connections, to build the relationships that were supposed to be the whole point of this exchange program. She had been met with cold silence, turned backs, and whispered insults in languages her translation implant picked up all too clearly. The message was clear: humans were not welcome here. Walked through the corridors with her head held high, her pace steady and unhurried. She did not react to the owl cadet who deliberately bumped her shoulder as he passed. She did not flinch when a group of students fell silent as she approached, then burst into hissing laughter after she had gone by. She simply kept walking, her face calm, her eyes forward. The mess hall was a vast circular chamber at the heart of the dormitory complex. Long tables radiated outward from a central serving area like spokes on a wheel, each one designated for a different species or training program. Collected her breakfast from the dispensers along the wall, a protein paste that the Academy's computers had formulated specifically for human nutritional needs, and looked for a place to sit. Every table was full, or rather, every table appeared to be full. She could see empty seats scattered throughout the room, but whenever she approached one, the cadets sitting nearby would spread out, placing bags or equipment in the vacant spots, making it clear that she was not welcome to join them. This, too, was something she had grown used to. Found a small table near the back of the hall, tucked into a corner where the light from the overhead fixtures barely reached. She sat down alone and began to eat, ignoring the glances and whispers from the cadets around her. Her tablet lay on the table beside her tray, displaying the schedule for the day. Morning, Advanced Tactical Theory with Instructor Oz. Afternoon, Formation and Inspection in the Central Courtyard. Evening, Combat Simulation Exercises in the Training Arena. It was the afternoon session that concerned her most. Formation was always the worst part of her day. It was when the entire academy gathered in one place, when every slight and insult was by the presence of hundreds of watching eyes. It was when and his friends had the largest audience for their cruelty. Finished her breakfast and disposed of her tray. She still had an hour before her first class, so she made her way to the academy's library, a towering structure filled with knowledge from 1,000 worlds. The library was one of the few places where she found peace. The alien cadets were too focused on their studies to bother harassing her, and the vast collection of human texts that the Academy had acquired as part of the exchange program gave her a connection to home that she desperately needed. She found her usual spot, a small reading alcove hidden among the stacks of data crystals containing Earth's literary history. She pulled up a collection of old Earth military histories on her tablet and began to read, losing herself in stories of battles fought, and one long before humanity ever dreamed of reaching the stars. The Siege of Masada, the Stand at Thermopylae, the Defense of Drift. These were the stories had grown up with, tales of humans facing impossible odds and refusing to surrender. They reminded her why she was here, why she endured the daily humiliations without complaint. She was not just representing herself. She was representing every human who had ever fought against overwhelming opposition. She would not be the one to fail. The morning class was held in a semicircular lecture hall overlooking one of the academy's many training grounds. Arrived early, as she always did, and took a seat in the back row where she could observe without being observed. Instructor Oz was an elder, his scales faded to a dull gray with age, his movements slow but precise. He had been teaching at the academy for over a century, and his knowledge of military tactics was legendary. He was also one of the few instructors who treated with something approaching fairness. The other cadets filed in slowly, taking their seats in species-specific clusters. The owls sat together near the front, their tails twitching with barely contained energy. The preferred the middle rows, their compound eyes able to take in the entire room at once. The spread out along the sides, their heavy bodies requiring more space than the narrow seats provided. Sat alone in the back, her tablet ready, her attention focused. Oz began the lecture with a discussion of the Third AL expansion, a series of wars that had reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy 5 centuries ago. He described the tactics employed by both sides, the strategic blunders that had led to stalemate, the diplomatic maneuvers that had finally brought peace. Took careful notes, her mind absorbing every detail. This was knowledge that no human had ever possessed, insights into alien military thinking that could prove invaluable in the future. Whatever else happened at this academy, she would not waste the opportunity to learn. The lecture continued for 2 hours, covering topics ranging from fleet deployment to planetary siege warfare. Oz asked questions throughout, calling on cadets at random to test their understanding. He never called on, but she answered every question silently in her head, comparing her responses to those of the cadets he did select. She was right more often than they were. When the class finally ended, gathered her belongings and made her way toward the exit. She was almost through the door when a heavy hand fell on her shoulder. She turned to find Instructor Oz standing behind her, his aged face unreadable. "A moment, Lieutenant Commander." nodded and stepped aside, allowing the other cadets to file past. Several of them shot curious glances in her direction, but none of them stopped. When the room was empty, Ah spoke again. His voice was low, pitched so that only she could hear. You understand the material better than most of my students. Your written work is exceptional. Why do you never speak in class? Considered her response carefully. I was told to minimize my presence, instructor, to observe and learn without drawing attention. As's tail swished slowly behind him. The diplomatic approach, sensible given the circumstances, but you should know that silence can be as loud as speech in its own way. I am not sure I understand, instructor. The other cadets see your silence as weakness. They believe you do not speak because you have nothing to say. His amber eyes met hers directly. I have read your personnel file, Lieutenant Commander. I know about the Battle of Station. I know what you did there. His jaw tightened slightly. The Battle of Station was not something she liked to remember. 3 days of desperate fighting against pirate raiders, with commanding the defense after every senior officer had been killed. She had held the station with a handful of wounded soldiers and a civilian population of 10,000, fighting off wave after wave of attacks until reinforcements finally arrived. She had been promoted twice afterward. She had also spent a month in medical recovery, her body broken in a dozen places. That was a different situation, instructor. Was it? As tilted his head, a gesture of curiosity common to his species. You were surrounded by enemies who wished you dead. You had no support, no allies, no reason to believe help would come. Yet you fought. You survived. You won. He paused, letting his words sink in. This academy is not so different, Lieutenant Commander. The enemies are simply more subtle. The weapons are words instead of plasma bolts. But make no mistake, you are fighting a battle here just as surely as you fought at station. Met his gaze steadily. What would you have me do, instructor? I would have you remember who you are. As turned and began walking toward the door. You are not a diplomat. You are a warrior. Act like one. He left without another word, his heavy footsteps echoing in the empty lecture hall. Stood alone for a long moment, thinking about what he had said. Then she gathered her belongings and headed for her next class. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the central courtyard as the academy's cadets assembled for formation. The temperature had climbed to nearly 40 degrees, the air thick and humid, but no one was permitted to show discomfort. This was a military academy, and military discipline was expected at all times. Took her position in the third row, standing at parade rest with her hands clasped behind her back. Her boots gleamed in the harsh light, the hours she had spent polishing them that morning paying off in their perfect appearance. Around her, hundreds of cadets stood in neat rows, organized by rank and training program. The command track students occupied the center of the formation, the elite of the elite, future admirals and generals who would one day lead fleets and armies across the galaxy. Was the only human among them. She could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her, hostile gazes boring into her from every direction. She ignored them, keeping her focus on a point in the distance, her breathing slow and steady. The minutes passed slowly. Formation was scheduled to begin at 1400 hours, but the inspecting officers were always late. It was a test, new, a way of measuring the cadets' ability to maintain discipline under uncomfortable conditions. She had stood at attention for hours during her training on Earth. This was nothing. Movement at the edge of her vision caught her attention. She did not turn her head, but her awareness sharpened, tracking the source of the disturbance. The Al Cadet was making his way through the formation, accompanied by his usual group of followers. They moved with exaggerated casualness, as if the rigid discipline of formation did not apply to them. His family was powerful, connected to some of the highest-ranking officers in the Al military. He had never faced consequences for his behavior, and he knew it. watched him approach through her peripheral vision. Her heart rate remained steady, her expression unchanged. She had faced down pirates and raiders and soldiers who wanted her dead. One arrogant alien cadet was not going to intimidate her. Stopped a few meters away, pretending to adjust his uniform while his companions spread out around him. They were positioning themselves for an audience, realized. Whatever was about to happen, they wanted witnesses. "The human is still here," said loudly, speaking in so that everyone nearby could understand. "I thought for certain it would have given up by now." Scattered laughter answered him. A few of the cadets in nearby rows turned to watch, their expressions ranging from amusement to anticipation. Did not react. 6 months, continued, strutting closer. 6 months of watching it stumble through our classes, struggle with our training, fail at every task that requires actual skill. He paused, letting his words carry across the courtyard. And yet it remains, like a pest that refuses to die. More laughter. The crowd of onlookers was growing, cadets abandoning their positions to get a better view of the entertainment. Still did not react. His tail lashed with frustration. This was not how the game was supposed to work. He was supposed to provoke her, to push her until she snapped. Every human he had ever heard of was hot-tempered, violent, easily manipulated. Why would this one not break? "Look at me when I speak to you, human." Slowly turned her head, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her gray eyes were calm, utterly devoid of emotion, like looking into the depths of a frozen lake. Something flickered in its expression, uncertainty perhaps or a hint of unease, but it passed quickly, replaced by renewed arrogance. "That is better, you should learn respect for your superiors." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air near her face. "Do you know what we call humans on my world? Soft skins, meat, prey." Said nothing. "Your species is weak," hissed. "You have no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no venom. Your hide is thin and easily punctured. You cannot see in darkness or sense heat or hear frequencies beyond your narrow range. You are blind, deaf, and helpless compared to any predator species in the galaxy." He leaned even closer, his breath hot against her face. "How your kind ever survived long enough to discover fire is a mystery. How you reached the stars is an insult to every species that achieved it through actual merit. You do not belong here. You do not belong anywhere except as food for superior races." The courtyard had fallen silent. Every cadet within earshot had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Even the few instructors visible on the edges of the formation were observing, making no move to intervene. This was a test, realized. Not just for her, but for everyone watching. The coalition wanted to see how humanity would respond to provocation. Would they prove to be the violent savages that so many species feared? Or would they show the restraint and discipline necessary to function in civilized society? She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to remain calm, to let the insults wash over her without response, to prove that humans could be trusted to control their impulses. But Instructor Os's words echoed in her mind. "You are not a diplomat. You are a warrior. Act like one." Opened her mouth to respond. Before she could speak, the expression shifted. He had seen something in her eyes, some flicker of defiance that told him she was about to fight back. And for some reason she could not understand, that seemed to please him. "Ah," he said softly, his voice dropping so that only she could hear. "There it is, the famous human temper. I was beginning to think you did not have one." He stepped back, raising his voice again so that the crowd could hear. "But words are not enough for creatures like you, are they? You need something more, physical." His companions shifted around him, forming a loose circle that blocked from the rest of the formation. She was isolated now, surrounded by enemies with no clear path of escape. Not that she was planning to escape. Reached up and unfastened the clasp of his ceremonial cloak, letting the expensive fabric fall to the ground. Beneath it, he wore the standard training uniform of a command track cadet, the same as except for the AL military insignia on his collar. "I challenge you," he announced formally, "here and now in front of these witnesses, combat until submission. The loser leaves the academy in disgrace." A ripple of shock passed through the watching crowd. Combat challenges were an ancient tradition among the AL, a way of settling disputes that dated back to their primitive past. They were rarely invoked at the academy, and never against members of other species. But they were not technically forbidden. Understood immediately what was happening. Could not simply attack her without consequences. But if she accepted his challenge, anything that happened would be considered legal under coalition law. He could hurt her, humiliate her, even kill her if the combat went wrong, and no one would be able to punish him. And if she refused, she would be branded a coward. Every species in the coalition would see humanity as weak, unwilling to fight for their honor. The diplomatic damage would be worse than anything could do to her physically. It was a trap with no good exit. "Well," spread his arms wide, his claws extended. "Do you accept, or do you prove once and for all that humans are nothing but prey?" The silence stretched out, thick and heavy with tension. Thought about her orders. She thought about the admirals and politicians back on Earth who were counting on her to represent humanity with grace and restraint. She thought about all the other humans scattered across coalition space, whose futures might depend on how she handled this moment. She thought about everything she would be risking if she accepted. Then she thought about Instructor Oz, and the look in his eyes when he told her to remember who she was. "The formation begins in 3 minutes," she said calmly. "You should find your position, Cadet." It was not an acceptance. It was not a refusal. It was a sidestep, a way of deflecting the challenge without giving him what he wanted. His face contorted with rage. This was not supposed to happen. She was supposed to accept, or she was supposed to run away in fear. This calm dismissal was worse than either option. "You think you can avoid this," he snarled. "You think you can hide behind procedure and protocol forever." "I am not hiding from anything," met his gaze steadily. "But I will not fight you for sport. If you want a war, you will have to work harder than this." His companions shifted uneasily. This was not going according to plan. The human was supposed to be easy to manipulate, easy to provoke. Instead, she was standing there like a statue, utterly unaffected by anything they threw at her. Glanced around at the watching crowd, seeing the confusion on their faces. He had promised them a show, a display of human weakness that would cement his reputation as the dominant force at the academy. Instead, he was the one who looked foolish, unable to even get a reaction from his target. His reputation was on the line. His family's honor was at stake. He had to do something, anything, to regain control of the situation. His eyes dropped to her boots. Those perfect, gleaming boots that she spent hours polishing every morning. The one thing she clearly took pride in. The one vulnerability he could see. A cruel smile spread across his scaled face. "You think you are so clever, human. You think your restraint makes you strong." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "Let me show you what your restraint is worth." He drew back his head and spat directly onto her boots. The thick, viscous saliva landed with a wet splat, dripping down the polished leather she had worked so hard to perfect. The crowd gasped as one, the sound echoing across the silent courtyard. In Al culture, spitting on someone was the ultimate insult. It declared the target to be less than nothing, unworthy of even the most basic dignity. It was an act that could start wars between nations, that had ended alliances and destroyed careers. And had just done it to the first human ever admitted to the Coalition Academy. Looked down at her boots. The saliva was thick and greenish, already beginning to dry in the harsh sunlight. 6 months of insults, 6 months of sabotage, 6 months of being treated like garbage, and now this. She raised her head slowly, her gray eyes meeting triumphant gaze. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. For 2 heartbeats, the courtyard remained frozen. Then something changed in its expression. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but everyone watching felt it. The temperature seemed to drop. The air grew thick and heavy. Even the sunlight seemed to dim. Smile faltered. He had seen many expressions on many faces over the years. Fear, anger, despair, defiance. But he had never seen anything like what he saw in the human's eyes now. It was not rage. Rage he could have understood, could have used against her. This was something else entirely. Something cold. Something ancient. Something that spoke of violence on a scale his people had never imagined. For the first time in his life, felt like prey. The moment stretched out into eternity. The watching cadets held their breath. The instructors on the edges of the formation leaned forward. Even the hot wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. Moved. Later, witnesses would disagree about what exactly they saw. Some said she simply reached out and grabbed him. Others swore she teleported, crossing the distance between them in a single, impossible instant. A few claimed they saw her move normally, just impossibly fast, faster than any human should be able to move. What everyone agreed on was the result. One moment was standing there with his smug smile and his superior attitude. The next, he was dangling in the air, his hand wrapped around his throat, his feet kicking uselessly a full meter off the ground. She was holding him with one arm supporting his entire weight without any visible effort. His claws scratched at her skin, but she did not even seem to notice. Her face was still calm, still controlled, but there was something in her eyes now that had not been there before. Something that made even the bravest owl warriors take a step back. "You made a mistake," she said. Her voice was quiet, conversational, but it carried across the silent courtyard as clearly as a shout. "You assumed that because I chose not to react, I was unable to react. You confused patience for weakness." Tried to speak, but her grip was too tight. Only a thin wheeze escaped his compressed throat. "Humans are not prey," continued. "We are predators, the most successful predators our planet ever produced. We hunted everything else to extinction. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant bears, anything that challenged us we killed." Her grip tightened slightly. Scales began to change color as blood flow was restricted to his brain. "We did not evolve claws or fangs because we did not need them. We made tools instead. Spears, arrows, guns, bombs, weapons that could kill from a distance, that turned our weaknesses into strengths. By the time your ancestors were learning to use fire, mine had already wiped out every other predator on our world." She pulled him closer, until their faces were centimeters apart. "The coalition brass told me to be diplomatic, to smile and nod and prove that humanity was civilized. So I let you insult me. I let you sabotage my work. I let you spit on me, because that was my mission." Her voice dropped even lower. "But you should know that restraint is a choice, and choices can be changed." She held him there for a long moment, letting him feel the full weight of his helplessness. Then, just as abruptly as she had grabbed him, she let go. Crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath, his claws clutching at his bruised throat. His companion stood frozen, too shocked to help him. The watching crowd was utterly silent. Looked down at the fallen owl with an expression that might have been pity, or might have been contempt. "Remember this feeling," she said. "Remember what it felt like to be helpless, to be at someone else's mercy, to know that your life depended entirely on their restraint." She stepped over his prone form, deliberately placing her saliva-stained boot on his discarded cloak. "And the next time you think about disrespecting a human, remember that I am considered moderate among my people." She walked back to her position in the formation line without looking back. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The other cadets parted before her like waves before a ship, their alien faces displaying expressions she had never seen directed at her before. Fear, respect, awe. His companions finally moved to help him, lifting him off the ground and supporting his weight as he struggled to regain his composure. His scales had gone pale, the bright copper and green faded to a sickly gray. His tail hung limp behind him, all trace of arrogance gone. The formation bell rang, its clear tone cutting through the stunned silence. Cadets scrambled to their positions, the spell finally broken. Instructors began shouting orders, restoring military discipline to the chaotic scene. Within moments, the formation was assembled, hundreds of alien soldiers standing in neat rows as if nothing unusual had happened. But everyone knew that something had changed. Senior instructor emerged from the administration building, her massive frame casting a long shadow across the courtyard. Her compound eyes swept across the assembled cadets, taking in every detail. She noticed his disheveled appearance, the strange tension in the air, the way certain cadets kept stealing glances at the human in the third row. "Is there a problem I should know about?" she clicked in standard. Silence answered her. His mandibles clacked thoughtfully. She had been an instructor at this academy for 40 years. She had seen thousands of cadets pass through these grounds, watched countless confrontations and conflicts and challenges. She knew exactly what that kind of silence meant. Someone had learned a valuable lesson today. Her compound eyes found, and for just a moment, something like approval flickered in their faceted depths. Then she turned away and began the afternoon inspection. Stood at perfect attention as the instructors moved through the formation, checking uniforms and equipment and posture. When they reached her position, they found nothing to criticize. Even her boots, despite the dried saliva still visible on the leather, were exactly as regulations required. No one mentioned the stain. The inspection continued for over an hour, moving methodically through the assembled cadets. When it was finally complete, returned to the front of the formation and began the closing announcements. Standard notices about upcoming exercises and schedule changes. Reminders about proper behavior and academy protocols. The same information that was announced every day, delivered in the same clicking monotone. But there was something different in the air, an awareness, a tension. Everyone in that courtyard knew that the relationship between humans and the coalition had just fundamentally shifted. When the formation was finally dismissed, walked back to her dormitory alone as she always did. But this time, the cadets she passed did not bump her shoulder or whisper insults behind her back. Instead, they stepped aside to let her pass, their alien eyes tracking her with newfound wariness. Word was spreading. By dinner, everyone in the academy would know what had happened. By tomorrow, the story would reach other coalition installations. By the end of the week, humans across the galaxy would be walking a little taller. Returned to her small room and closed the door behind her. She stood for a long moment in the darkness, her back against the door, her heart finally beginning to race as the adrenaline caught up with her. She had broken her orders. She had shown violence. She had possibly destroyed everything that humanity had worked so hard to build. But as she looked at the dried saliva on her boots, she found that she did not regret it. Some insults could not be ignored. Some lines could not be crossed without consequences. And sometimes, the only way to earn respect was to demand it. She sat down on her bed and began the slow process of cleaning her boots. The saliva came off easily enough, leaving no permanent stain on the polished leather. When she was finished, she set them carefully beside her bed and lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring consequences. She would probably be summoned to the commandant's office, questioned about her actions, possibly disciplined or expelled. Family would demand justice. The diplomatic corps would have to scramble to contain the damage. But all of that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Holt fell asleep with a smile on her face. The dining hall was subdued the next morning. Cadets who normally filled the space with conversation and laughter were quiet, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever walked past. She collected her breakfast from the dispensers and looked for a place to sit. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she found that seats were not mysteriously occupied when she approached. In fact, several tables seemed to have spaces that opened up as she drew near, as if the cadets were actively trying not to offend her. She chose her usual corner table, sitting alone out of habit rather than necessity. But she noticed that the glances directed her way were different now, less hostile, more curious, and in some cases almost respectful. She was halfway through her meal when a shadow fell across her table. Looked up to find an owl standing before her. Not but a female of the species, her scales a deep blue rather than the copper and green common to males. She was older than most of the cadets, probably in her late 30s by human reckoning, with the bearing of someone who had seen combat. "May I join you?" The question was asked in perfect English, without the translation implant's characteristic delay. This owl had learned native language. "Please," said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. The owl sat down, folding her tail carefully beneath the chair. Her amber eyes studied with frank curiosity. "I am Commander, she said. "I teach close-quarters combat techniques to advanced students." "Lieutenant Commander Holt, but I suspect you already knew that." A's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Everyone knows who you are now, Lieutenant Commander. You made quite an impression yesterday." Took another bite of her breakfast, keeping her expression neutral. "I assume you are here to deliver my summons to the Commandant's office." "No, I am here because I am curious." A leaned forward, her claws clicking lightly against the table's surface. "How did you do it?" "Do what?" "Lift with one arm. He weighs over 100 kilograms more than you. I have studied human physiology. You should not have been able to move him, let alone suspend him in the air like that." Considered her response carefully. This was dangerous ground. Too much information could be seen as a threat. Too little could be seen as evasion. "Humans have a survival mechanism called hysterical strength," she said finally. "In moments of extreme stress or danger, our bodies can temporarily access our full muscular potential. We can lift objects that would normally be far too heavy, move faster than should be possible, ignore injuries that would incapacitate us under normal circumstances." A's eyes widened slightly. "You are saying that what you demonstrated yesterday was not your full capability." "I am saying that humans are more than we appear." Met the owl's gaze directly. "We evolved on a high-gravity world, competing against predators larger and stronger than ourselves. Our bodies are designed for endurance and adaptation, not raw power. But when we need power, we can find it." "Fascinating." A sat back, her expression thoughtful. "And this is common to all humans, this ability to exceed your normal limitations." "Every human has the potential. Most never need to access it. We live in civilized societies now. We have machines to do our heavy lifting, weapons to handle our fighting. But the capacity is still there, written into our genes." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "This is why the Coalition was afraid to admit us. Not because we are primitive or savage, but because they understood what we are capable of. We may not have claws or fangs or venom, but we have something more dangerous." "And what is that?" "Potential." His gray eyes were steady. "The potential for violence that we have learned to control but never eliminated. Every human you meet is carrying a weapon inside them. We simply choose not to use it." I was silent for a long moment, digesting this information. Then she nodded slowly. "I believe I understand now why the Coalition leadership has been so cautious about your species." She rose from her seat, her movements smooth and controlled. Thank you for speaking with me, Lieutenant Commander. I suspect we will talk again soon. She walked away without looking back, leaving alone with her thoughts. The summons came that afternoon, delivered by a junior cadet who refused to meet eyes. She was to report to the commandant's office immediately. Changed into her dress uniform and made her way across the campus to the administration building. It was a massive structure, built from the same gray stone as the rest of the academy, but decorated with symbols and banners from every species in the coalition. A visual reminder that this institution served everyone equally. In theory, at least. The commandant's office was on the top floor, accessible only by a private elevator that required biometric verification. Placed her hand on the scanner and waited as the system confirmed her identity. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. The elevator carried her upward in silence. When it finally stopped and the doors opened again, she found herself in a reception area staffed by a secretary whose compound eyes tracked her movements with unsettling precision. "The commandant will see you now," the secretary clicked, gesturing toward a massive wooden door at the far end of the room. Straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and walked through the door. The commandant's office was enormous, taking up nearly half of the building's top floor. The walls were lined with artifacts and trophies from centuries of coalition military history. Windows on three sides offered a panoramic view of the academy grounds, the training fields and dormitories spread out below like a model city. Commandant sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of crystal, her ancient scales gleaming silver in the afternoon light. She was over 300 years old, one of the oldest still in active service, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. "Lieutenant Commander Holt, please sit." Took the offered chair, a human-designed piece that had clearly been brought in specifically for this meeting. She sat at attention, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. "I assume you know why you are here." "Yes, Commandant. I expect there are consequences for my actions yesterday." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Consequences? Yes, I suppose that is one way to describe the situation." She reached across her desk and activated a holographic display. Security footage began to play, showing the confrontation in the courtyard from multiple angles. Watched herself grab by the throat and lift him off the ground. She watched her own lips move as she delivered her warning. She watched herself drop him and walk away without a backward glance. It was strange, seeing herself from the outside. She had been so focused on that she had not noticed her own expression, the cold intensity in her eyes that seemed almost inhuman. "Do you know how many times I have watched this recording since yesterday?" asked, pausing the playback. "No, Commandant." 17 times. I have shown it to my senior staff, to the Coalition Military Council, to the diplomatic corps responsible for human relations. We have analyzed every frame, every word, every movement. She leaned forward, her ancient eyes boring into us. "Do you know what conclusion we reached?" Shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "We concluded that Cadet is extremely fortunate to still be alive." Whatever had been expecting, it was not that. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "The security analysis indicates that you could have killed him at any point during the confrontation," continued. "The grip you used on his throat was precisely calibrated to cause maximum discomfort without permanent damage. The pressure you applied was exactly enough to restrict blood flow without causing unconsciousness. You were in complete control the entire time." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This suggests that your actions were not the result of rage or loss of control. They were deliberate, calculated. You chose to spare him." "Yes, Commandant." "Why?" Considered the question carefully before answering. "Because killing him would not have served any useful purpose. He insulted me, yes. He disrespected my species. But he is young and foolish, the product of a society that taught him humans were inferior. Death seemed like a disproportionate response to ignorance. And if he had continued to provoke you, if he had attacked you physically, then I would have defended myself with appropriate force. Met the commandant's gaze directly. I am a soldier, Commandant. I know the difference between defense and murder. Was not a threat to my life. He was a threat to my dignity. Those require different responses. Was silent for a long moment, studying with an expression that was impossible to read. There are those who believe you should be expelled, she said finally. That your actions were inappropriate for a coalition officer, that you have proven humans are too aggressive for civilized society. His heart sank. She had known this was coming, had prepared herself for the worst, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real. I am not among them. Looked up surprised. I watched the security recording 17 times, repeated. I watched harass you for over 15 minutes before you responded. I watched him violate 14 separate codes of conduct. I watched his companions position themselves to block any escape route you might have used. And I watched you respond with precisely the minimum force necessary to end the confrontation. She rose from behind her desk and walked slowly around it, her claws clicking on the crystal floor. Do you know why humans were excluded from the coalition for so long? We were deemed too primitive, Commandant. That is the official reason. The truth is somewhat different. Stopped directly in front of. We were afraid of you. His eyes flickered with surprise, though she quickly schooled her expression. Your species is an anomaly, the Commandant continued. Most intelligent races evolve toward cooperation before they achieve. They learn to suppress their aggressive instincts, to channel their energies into peaceful pursuits. Conflict becomes ritualized, symbolic, rarely resulting in actual violence. She reached out and tapped one claw against his chest, directly over her heart. Humans never did that. You carry the full weight of your evolutionary heritage. Every one of you is capable of violence that would make a owl warrior flinch. You simply choose not to engage it most of the time. That choice is what makes you dangerous. We have worked hard to be worthy of coalition membership, Commandant. We have no desire for conflict. I believe you. Turned and walked toward one of the massive windows, gazing out at the academy grounds below. And I believe that humans will be valuable members of our alliance in time. But you should know that what happened in that courtyard has changed how many species view your kind. She turned back to face. Some will respect you more. Others will fear you. A few will hate you even more than before. The question is how you will respond to this new reality. Stood, meeting the Commandant's gaze directly. I will continue to do my duty, Commandant. I will train. I will learn. I will prove that humanity deserves its place among the stars. And if anyone else chooses to test my restraint, I will remind them why that is a poor decision. Made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. Good, that is exactly what I hoped you would say. She walked back to her desk and sat down, suddenly businesslike. You are not being expelled, Lieutenant Commander. In fact, you are being reassigned. Felt a jolt of alarm. Reassigned. To the Advanced Combat Training Program. Commander requested you personally. His ancient eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. It seems your demonstration yesterday impressed her. She wants to see what else you are capable of. His mind raced, trying to process this unexpected development. Advanced combat training was normally reserved for cadets who had completed their first full year at the academy. To be selected after only 6 months was unprecedented. I am honored, Commandant. Do not thank me yet. A's program has a reputation for breaking cadets who are not ready for it. You will be pushed harder than you have ever been pushed before. If you survive, you will emerge as one of the finest warriors in the coalition. She paused, her expression growing serious. And if you do not survive, we will notify your family and send your remains back to Earth with full military honors. swallowed hard but did not look away. "I understand, Commandant." "Good," dismissed her with a wave of her clawed hand. "Report to Commander at 0600 tomorrow morning. Do not be late." Snapped a perfect salute, turned on her heel and marched out of the office. Her heart was pounding, her mind spinning with implications and possibilities. She had expected punishment. Instead, she had received an opportunity. The question now was whether she could survive it. The sun was setting by the time returned to her dormitory. The purple and orange sky of Prime painted everything in strange, alien colors, making the familiar campus look like something from a dream. She walked slowly, taking the time to think about everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been an isolated outcast, tolerated but not accepted. Now she was something else entirely. A legend perhaps, or a warning. She passed groups of cadets who fell silent as she approached, then whispered urgently after she had gone by. She noticed that Al no longer looked at her with contempt. The expressions she saw now were more complex, a mixture of respect and fear and something that might have been curiosity. Was nowhere to be seen. According to the rumor she had overheard, he had locked himself in his quarters after the incident and refused to come out. His family was supposedly demanding an investigation, but no one seemed to think anything would come of it. The security footage made it clear that he had been the aggressor, had simply responded. She reached her dormitory room and pressed her palm against the lock. The door slid open, revealing the small space that had been her home for the past 6 months. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Her tablet on the desk, her spare uniform hanging on the wall, her boots beside the bed, still gleaming from the polish she had applied that morning. Sat down on the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building since yesterday. Her muscles ached, her head throbbed, her hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline that had been coursing through her system for over a day. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something she had not felt since arriving at this academy. Hope. She had proven something today. Not just to the aliens who had doubted her, but to herself. She had been tested, truly tested, and she had not broken. She had not lost control. She had responded to an impossible situation with exactly the right amount of force, and she had walked away stronger than before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A's combat program would push her to her limits and beyond. The other species at the academy would be watching her more closely than ever, waiting to see if her display of strength was real or just a fluke. But was not worried. She was a human. Her ancestors had faced down ice ages and famines and plagues. They had hunted mammoths with spears and built cities from nothing. They had split the atom and reached the stars through sheer stubborn determination to survive. Whatever this alien academy threw at her, she would handle it. She lay back on her bed and closed her eyes, letting the tension drain from her body. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, she allowed herself to rest. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the gleam of her polished boots in the fading light. They were still perfect. They always would be.